Hello. Following up on yesterday's live stream with the first Wednesday live stream of 2025. I'm hoping to carry these on, get a streak going here every Wednesday, see how long I can take it. There are going to be some Wednesday holidays. I might be sick every now and then with the kids, but let's see how long I can carry it on. So first Wednesday live stream of 2025. I was going to work on Blueprint, but I've done a lot of live streams on Blueprint. I want to do live streams on Blueprint. But piggybacking yesterday's kind of impromptu live stream of upgrading BaseCode using Shift, there were a couple things that I feel like, I have some common viewers, so thank you for that, some repeat viewers. And for those, I thought it might be good, let's just go back on these thumbs down comments from yesterday and get these better, right? I can rerun this shift. We can see it kind of work. I don't have to merge anything. I can just go again and kind of rerun the exact same shift and hopefully see that these aren't there. Or even just honestly, I can just TDD it. So I think this is a good stream-worthy thing. It's a incremental improvement to shift, but also a something I want to do. I always want to incrementally improve shift. So let's kind of jump in. It'll give you a little behind the scenes on how shift works as well. And again, I don't think we actually need to rerun the PR. I think we could just TDD it. So let's talk, for those that maybe didn't view yesterday, let's talk about what happened. So I ran the Laravel 11 shift, and it left a couple comments that I feel like shift probably didn't need to leave me, and people really enjoy the comments on here. It's kind of like your own personal upgrade. It tells you, the new stuff in Laravel with these like informational comments. It tells you things you might want to look at with these kind of like warning comments, but Shift automated it. But hey, you might want to take like a double take, and then any kind of X comments of like, hey, you need to go fix this for your upgrade to be completed. In this case, I was using the Laravel collective HTML package, which is deprecated. You need to either convert that to raw HTML or use Spassy's package instead. And there's an HTML converter shift that's available to automate that process if you want. But here are the three comments that I just thought, again, all these comments are great, but I don't want there to be so many comments that shift is noisy, right? It can't feel like too much. So the fact that I got comments here that didn't really apply to my application are just 2 or 3 comments that don't need to be here, right? Already there's a fair amount of comments here, and while each one has pretty good information, again, I'm always worried that they're noisy. So for as much as people love the comments, it's because they're super refined. Just like the Laravel documentation, it's refined, right? Taylor rewrites that documentation every couple years, like top to bottom. That polish is what people love about the Laravel community, and I want to exhibit the same polish in my products, like Shift, right? So that's kind of the backstory. Specifically as far as the code, here are the 2 comments I want to focus on today. If we get far enough, I might look at this one as well, but this one's a little more specific kind of to my projects and Sentry. I don't know the application, but these 2, definitely other people are probably seeing these comments when they don't need to. So I think we can clean that up. So what's happening here is Shift is attempting, as part of the Laravel 11 slimming, the auth service provider, the route service provider, the broadcast service provider, the event service provider, all these extra service providers are no longer in Laravel 11 application. They're no longer in the skeleton. They've been removed or slimmed. And now the documentation says, hey, put stuff in your app service provider. It doesn't say go put it in event service provider. It doesn't say make a service provider. All of that's kind of gone. Just put it in your app service provider. Policies are auto-discovered, so there's really no reason to even probably put them in your app service provider. These service providers just aren't needed. So Shift attempts to slim these, and in the process of doing so, it wants to leave a comment to just kind of let you know what happened. In this case, it removed the policies property because it believes that it could be auto-discovered, new in Laravel 11. But in the case of this project, the policies and listeners that were here were just old school default values. They didn't actually exist. And so I think a very, very easy fix here would just be, hey, if this event service provider, matched a really old version, or the properties within it contain just what an old version were, and those files don't necessarily exist, like, don't show this comment. I think that's the easy fix here. And again, it would make the comment less noisy in the very specific case where you just had that generic listener that's not even part of the project, right? So let's go look at what that actual code is here, just because we're going to take this code and put it in our test cases. And I'll talk a little bit about how Shift runs the tests. But if I go look for like events, let's just start with the event service provider. So if we look at the event service provider, we bring up the raw diff here. Let me close these comments so I get a better view on my screen. And let's load this. Again, it was all just removed. But here's the example, right? Should discover events, the boot, the listen. This is really just a default old school provider. I'm kind of surprised, to be honest, that Shift didn't just match this to a previous version in the framework. But my guess is the combination of this really old listen value, but the should discover events false, is probably actually technically custom. So again, the thing to do would be to read the listen property and see if its internals, its value is an exact match of like what I have highlighted here. I think that's the easiest thing that we can do. And that honestly, we could just get away with like a text-based match there. It doesn't even need to get like reflection-y or static analysis. Like if you have an old school default event listener, like that's what it's going to look like. There's no reason to get extra fancy here. So we won't do this for each one, but let me just kind of harp on the backstory here just a little bit more. Let me go into the event service provider. And let's kind of see, I just want to see how old that is. So again, this has been here a while, and this is proof that I kind of have a hybrid application. The BaseCode original Laravel app, again, was probably originally written with like Laravel 5.6. So I just want to see how far back do I go and what does the event service provider look like to try to match the one I had in my project. Like, is there an event service provider that looks like this, and what version did like this stop being in there? My guess is it's pretty old. My guess is that's like maybe even 5.8 or something crazy. So we can see here in 10.x that they have the new automatic email notifications. So let's go back to 9.x. Yeah, so again, this goes back pretty far. Let's go to 8.x. Yep, there it is still, the email verification. Again, I think this is probably pre-modern Laravel, which is why the Laravel 11 shift doesn't really give a lot of credence to that. Yeah, I bet you it's 5.8. Look at this. Am I right? Nope, even earlier than 5.8. So again, proof that this is a very old Laravel app that has been upgraded. Oh man, 5.7. We had event. Wow. 5.6. There it is. 5.6. 5.6 was the last version that had this in there. So again, proof that BaseCode was written pre-Laravel 5.6, right? So Shift, just as kind of a tangent again, I ran the Laravel 11 shift. The shifts, they do look backwards a fair amount, but this would have needed to look backwards like what? 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5.8, 5.7, 5.6. Would have had to look back 8 versions to kind of get this right. Shifts don't do everything, right? There's not one shift that does every upgrade. The point is you should be running the shifts incrementally, or at least every other shift or something like that, every other version or something like that, right? You can't really expect the Laravel 11 shift to go and fix something from Laravel 5.5. There are other shifts that look for things like the upgrade checker. It will look for legacy type code. But as far as the upgrade is concerned, that's why Shift didn't catch this. But again, this was a default value. I don't think I'm the only application that may see these kind of values. And I'm already doing some checking of the internals of the property. So why not just throw this in there again to make it less noisy? So just that little bit of refinement, a little bit of backstory there. Let's get into the code. Enough chat, let's get into the code, right? Okay, so what I want to do is, what I have here, I went ahead and brought it open just to make sure I was in the right spot. What every shift is, and I've talked about this before on a live stream, but what every shift is it's basically this pipeline of tasks, right? If we go look at this, every shift has a task. So I have a bunch of tasks. There's Laravel 11 specific tasks in this case. One of them, as I mentioned, is consolidate providers. And what this does is attempt to go in and look at your default service providers and consolidate them into the app service provider to give you a Laravel 11 type application, a slimmed application. That way, when you go and read the docs and it says, hey, put this in your app service provider, it's in your app service provider. It's not like the old event service provider. The docs don't say that anymore, right? So you want the latest, greatest, you want to be reading documentation, you want to be following and copying, pasting code samples from the internet, from the documentation. Let's make sure your app looks like that. It doesn't look like 5.6, right? So part of what happens in here is it cycles through each one of the default used to be included service providers, one of which is the event service provider. And I have a method in here. Yeah, here we go. Comments on policy. Comment on policies. So this is what we want to start with. So what it does is it looks at the class. I've already done some abstract syntax tree, some parsing of this class, right? So it looks at the class and says, do you even have a policies property on that particular file, on the event service provider? Or sorry, the auth service provider in this case. Okay, I don't, so don't even worry about it. If I do, then see if that snippet is empty. Meaning, is it just a commented out bunch of providers? Because again, older Laravels used to just comment you kind of an example there. If we kept going back and looking at the skeleton, I think way back in like 5.2, it was just a commented class. But this is kind of the end of it. And now you get this discovered policies things, which is, I don't want to see that. I shouldn't have seen that for my application. So kind of what we want to do here, and I actually do this for the listeners. So I want to do something very similar here where we basically say, is the value of the policies property an old default? If it's an old default, then I would basically want to return, right? So we could go ahead and kind of map this out. Let me get the keyboard going here. Sometimes when I shift, no pun. Sometimes when I'm moving over just a bit to be like in the center of the camera, my fingers are just rotated off the keyboard, one key, and I just terrible at typing when that happens. So let me get in the right spot here. So we'll say if false for now. I just want to kind of get more than pseudocode going. Ooh, that was interesting. PHP Storm, I didn't want that. Oh, it's probably because I don't have the semicolon. I thought it was interesting PHP Storm chopped that line up in there. Okay, so here we just return. Of course it's false, it's not gonna like that, but basically we need to run this particular test. So right now I'm gonna return false, that way I don't right now I'm gonna do just an if false check because I wanna kind of TDD this out, but I wanted to show you, the audience, the viewers, kind of what these tasks look like. So let's go back to the TDD. So everything has a test associated with it. So this class has a consolidate providers test. And somewhere in here, my guess is we have a test to see if we leave that comment. But just to talk about the structure of these tests, if you've ever done any kind of fixture-based testing, that's what's happening here. They're very integration-y. If you've used something like Orchestra Test Bench, if you use Test Bench to test like a Laravel package or even a Laravel project, you kind of do something very similar here. So the point here is that I have this internal test helper called fake project. And what I can do is I can say, hey, the event service provider looks like, this text fixture, or it looks like this old version of Laravel. And this allows me to kind of quickly set up a project structure or an old app kind of skeleton. And then I can call the perform method. I can perform the task and then I can make some assertions on it just using PHP unit or custom assertions that I've written, again, for Shift's testing layer. So this is really the main thing here, this fake project. So what we can do is we can create a new test case that fakes the project and makes it look like the event service provider that I had, right? Or even just any service provider. We can make it look like a 5.3 service provider just to truly test. And then we would say, hey, kind of like this is doing, assert no comments, right? I would assert that that file just got removed and we don't have to worry about leaving any comments. So let's see what test exists in here, because I feel like there probably is one and we just need to kind of beef it up. So it comments on routes, it consolidates providers, okay, good. It does nothing when no providers exist, fine. It does nothing when providers are heavily customized, fine. It handles empty, it handles relocated providers, it preserves defaults, it remaps observers, okay, cool. So if you did actually have real observers or listeners, fine. It slims and removes empty properties, here we go. It consolidates real world providers, and then setup. That's interesting, that's at the bottom. Let's move this to the top. I feel like that should be at the top. Oh, I know, it's not at the top because of the visibility. Okay, this real world provider one is a little bit weird, but I think, let's work on this one. Let's do this. Let's say it slims and removes, I'll just say old default removes providers with old defaults. How about that? This is a good one. Okay, so we're gonna leave the app service provider fine. We're gonna bring in a new auth service provider and a new event service provider. So we can just write one test and drive both of these out. So we have this fixtures directory, and what I'll say here is old. Whoa, not that. How did I get into that mode? Old default, yeah, auth provider. That's fine with me. What is this doing that for? What is going on here? Old default. I went into some kind of like copy paste mode there. That was strange. All right, let's touch these. So we'll say touch, boom. And let's get this other one. Ah, why is that highlighting like that? Did I like download the latest version or something? Strange. Okay, and then assert file not changed. Oh my God, go away. We want auth provider and we want, okay, so what we would do is using those two fixtures, we would assert that nothing changed in the app service provider. I just have this no op PHP file just to make sure nothing happened. And then we would have removed the other files because they don't have anything in them that we care about. We would have slimmed them. And then we don't leave any comments. That's the kicker. We don't leave any comments on the PR when this happens. Right now, I would expect this to fail because 2 comments are there, and we probably would have put something in app service provider. So I would expect this line to fail. When you're writing tests, it's kind of good to call your shot, I think. Sometimes tests can fail for arbitrary reasons or reasons that you wouldn't have expected, but you kind of think, oh, test failure, and you go write code to make it pass. And then you get like really stuck because your brain thought, oh, it failed because of the right reason, but it actually failed for the wrong one. So I like kind of calling my shot on this. So let's open this and let's go get my, is it event service provider? Auth service provider. Let's go get my old auth service provider. And again, this, can I copy this view file? Copy you. All right, let's bring you in. Good. And then let's go get the old event service provider as well. Where'd you go? Event service provider, here you are. Let's view file. Why is this so slow? Oh, did it open in a new tab? Oh, no, there it is. What is going on here? Did I open this in a new tab? It must have opened in a new tab or something. Copy. Paste. All right, cool. So there's the event and there's the old policies, right? Okay, so that's the test fixture that we want. So if we just hone in on this particular test case, let's do, I think I had this already, there it is. Let's filter that. We should get a failure. Cool. Good. Okay, so here we go. This is the right line. I can already tell this is the app service provider. But if we look, it failed on line 266. So let's go take a look, make sure we're right. 266, that's exactly what we expected it to fail on. And because it basically created, an app server, or it updated the app service provider based on booting this API rate limit thing, right? So it appended this by default, so it automatically updated that. It probably shouldn't have done that, to be honest. I think it's pulling this route service provider. So let's just bring this in so it actually doesn't do that. So if we bring this in, theoretically, it won't do that anymore. There we go. So it's not putting anything in, it's not updating the app service provider. So it's not failing exactly where I thought it would. It did the first time, but now it's not. It's moving ahead to the comments, and it's doing that. It's correct, but it's doing that because now we don't have anything that we're actually updating in the app service provider, because there's no actual things to do for the listeners or the policies because they're auto-discovered, and that's the whole point. We simply just don't want to leave the comment. There wasn't anything that we actually moved. We were defaulting putting in the route service provider or the rate limiter for a default route service provider to be helpful. But if we don't actually have a route service provider, or at least we have one that doesn't have a rate limiter, then it doesn't get moved across. So that's why we actually needed to update our test to say, okay, look, in this scenario, we're not trying to test that the app service provider got consolidated. We're testing that no comments were left. So I just want to make sure that I set up the test, or set up the project in this case, to get to that. I'm not testing that the rate limiter got moved. That's tested elsewhere. So we're just going to bring this across to make sure that it's empty and therefore nothing happens in regards to other things. Because that's not what I'm trying to test. So this isn't changed. These did get removed, but the kick is they got removed in RPR too. That's what we see here. It's, red, right? It was deleted as part of that. But we got the comment. That's the part that matters. So now no comments should be left. And instead it's saying failed asserting that 2 were empty. So failed asserting that there were no comments, failed asserting that array is empty. All right, cool. So let's actually change. I want to change this. I want to take the opportunity to change this real quick. Let's assert empty. So if contents is null, assert empty. Failed asserting that there were no comments. I would have liked to see that it said there were 2 comments. Failed asserting that there were 2 comments. I think what would be cool here, maybe instead of saying empty, maybe we could do 0. Maybe we could say assert count is 0. And then the message failed asserting there were no comments. I just want to see if this says 2 is not equal to 0. Yeah, there we go. This feels better to me. I like this better. See, little refactor there. I like reading that better. Failed asserting there were no comments. Failed asserting the actual size 2 matches expected size 0. That feels better because it kind of lets me know how many comments actually happened. If I say there should be no comments, well, how many did I actually get? I just think that's a little bit of helpful information instead of saying, oh, the array wasn't empty. Well, I wasn't talking about array. I was talking about comments. So a little more human, I think. Okay, let's go back now here and let's actually start making this pass. And again, a little bit of setup, but I think it's going to allow us to have 2 things pass. So we'll be able to focus on both these at the same time. So we've got the test. Let's drive this out, or we've driven it out with the test. Let's actually start getting some things to pass. So we know what we have to do here. We now want to take the snippet. We have policies. So let's just echo policies. We've already extracted the policy's value. Let's see what it looks like. So let's run this again. We should get it out. There it is. Beautiful. App policies. Perfect. does this match what an old default used to be, right? The default that we've copied from the skeleton. If it does, right, then just return. There's nothing to do. You can slim it. It's all good. So let's get rid of this line. We'll say something like, let's just break this off into its own little method. I think this, I think I already have something in listeners. Where's comment on listeners? Yeah, see, I already have this. Comment on listeners is default listen. There we go. Let's kind of borrow that. I already have this for listen. I just need to update what it actually checks. So let's say is default policy. And we'll pass it in policies. There we go. All right, let's make this method. And we'll make it a bool. And here's default listen. So let's just kind of do the same thing. And we'll say, is this policies? Policies, yeah, policies. Okay, so default base patches default listen value. Let's make this too. So let's touch this. And what we're looking for, or wait, crap. We need to touch default policies value. Sorry about that. Let's bring that across. There we go. Touch that instead. Okay, let's open this. And what this should contain is this. Or that's the event listen. Sorry. Let's bring up the auth from back then. There it is. Perfect. So it should really simply just contain that. Right? Kind of, more or less. We don't have the array. We don't have... I'm not super happy with this comparison, but I think it'd get it to pass. Again, we could probably be a little more savvy than just a simple text-based comparison, but I think this is a start, right? Let's look at the default listen value. Yeah, see, it's all unindented, like top level. So let's just go with this and see what happens. Let's see if we get it back down to just one now. Do we have just one comment now if I run this again? Failed asserting that 1 is 0. There you go. So it's as simple as that, right? See, it's a tiny little change, a lot of setup, but it's a tiny little change. But it's nicer, right? It's not gonna leave me some comment that doesn't make any sense for my app. It's just one less thing I have to check, right? Shift can do that. We can have a better, we can have a better experience. So why not, right? Might not be for everyone. Again, this is a pretty hybrid old school thing. It probably would have been picked up by earlier shifts. But just in case, why leave the comment? Okay, we can do the same thing to get to 0 comments, and then we'll refine it. Let's refine it. Let's refactor later. Let's just make it work for now. Refactor next. We'll be armed with a test. It'll be easier. So default listen value, we have normalized snippet listen versus the default. So the default listen value here is Laravel's. But we saw in my app and in older apps, it is possible for you to have this instead, right? So let's bring this across. So I want to change this from default listen value to like, what version was this? 5.6. So let's say, let's change the names of these. Let's copy this, paste it, and call it default listen value. Let's say post 5.6. And then we'll do another one called pre 5.6. All right, and we'll get rid of that default listen value. And post 5.6 stays the same. That's really, I did that backwards. Let's get it right. That's really post 5.7 is really what it is. Well, it's post 5.6. It's pre 5.7 is technically, I think, the way you would read that. So pre 5.7, post 5.6. Yes, let's copy this and let's go into pre 5.7 is this, and we'll unindent that. And let's see now if we add the same check. So we'll say normalize. I wonder if we could like, can we inline this a little bit? Do I use this anywhere else? I renamed it. Let me just make sure I don't use this anywhere else. It's probably only used here. Why is PHP Storm so slow? There you go. Okay, I'm only used here. All right, cool. So let's say default listen value post 5.6. This is going to be the most, the most common one it picks up. So let's just default here, just to save like a micro optimization. We'll say if we'll return, return false. And then we'll do this again. Otherwise, return true. Oh no, sorry. Is it default? Okay, so if it's default, return true. The default will be to return false. Okay, so this needs to be pre 5.7. So first, for most applications, they're going to be the post 5.6 default value. If they are, then return true. It's a default value. And then fall back for kind of older scenarios. Was it a pre 5.7 value? If so, return true. And then finally, if it didn't match any kind of default that we're aware of, then return false. So if we run this again, it should pass. And it does. Let's see if the whole test suite passed. Just make sure I didn't break anything else. Or the whole test file passes. It checks against a lot of different projects, so it takes a second. Cool, okay. Everything else passed. So good. So I think that will fix, seems to not leave those comments in this case, but everything else works, meaning it's leaving comments in other cases. So how can we improve that? What does normalize snippet do? This is kind of funky. Oh, I see. Okay, so we actually don't need to worry about the content. This actually, so what normalize snippet does is it's kind of like you can consider it like an internal code styler. It basically removes leading white space, and then it removes, in this case, trailing commas, right? So it would basically, just to kind of demonstrate what that would look like, if we go look at like pre-5, what that would end up making this look like is kind of taking that out and then taking these out. And it would do that in your file too. And so it doesn't matter if you had trailing commas or this, that, and that. Now you could go so far as to also like not make this quoted and things like that. You can make it the class syntax. Like you could get pretty crazy here if you wanted to. You could kind of compare different versions. But again, the point, what we're really after here is that it's default, right? If you kind of modified this in some way, then you probably modified it because you're actually using it, right? We're really wanting to be strict that you matched an old skeleton value. Otherwise, leaving the comment, I think, is fine because maybe you do have this. And again, I could drive it even deeper. I could analyze this. I could see if you had an app listens folder, right? I could see if you had an app events folder. I could do a couple other things. But again, this comment should probably be left in that case because if you have an app events folder, you may have other events that are getting automatically discovered currently. It doesn't mean that I should or should not leave this comment. I don't know with enough certainty. So that's the other thing about Shift is I don't want to perform, I try to avoid false automation. In that case, I would rather leave a comment that's potentially noisy, but have you as a human review it and get it right, than to Shift automate it, you never see it, and you go to production and now you got something weird happening, right? So the point here is that I want to be very strict. You have to match this old default value exactly, right? You have to match that exactly with no other policies there, no other, tweaks to this file. no other changes. If everything else in this file is exactly the same and your policy only contained this, which is kind of a generic policy that would never be written anyway, we can kind of safely remove it and not leave the comment, I think. But anything else, any other tweaks to this line, maybe you're using it. You should probably see the comment. So that's kind of where we are on that. Let's see what time we are. Okay, so we're 30 minutes in. Let's see what this other one is. So these two are good. So these two have been fixed. If I reran this PR based on my tests, I would not see these comments. Cool. The next thing, it's pretty similar, and I think I might want to attempt to tackle it, or at least let's look at it, because I think it's a pretty similar implementation. Shift thought that I had a custom exception handler. If we go look at my exception handler, which I don't think will actually be in the changelog because it got left in here. Oh yeah, no, I removed it. I ended up removing it by hand. But the point here is that if I load this was actually a default handler. The only part in here that was different was this Sentry registry. Everything else in here was exactly the same. It was exactly the same as a default Laravel 11 or Laravel 10 prior to Laravel 11 handler would have looked like, right? It would have matched a previous version is the point. It would have been default. So it's kind of like one of those things. It's like the question is like how many people are using Sentry? Is it worthwhile to auto wire this up, right? It happened in my projects, so maybe it's happening in other projects. And again, I'm dog fooding it. I'm the creator. I have the privilege of being able to tweak this maximally for me, right? So tweak it to the extreme for my own use case. So what would happen here is like, let's see, do they still do that in like a prior to Laravel? Yeah, see, latest version. I'm just curious which version did they have the old, here we go, older versions. So it's probably not 8, 9, or 10. It's probably 6. They were still doing it this old way. Yeah, there it is. So again, I'm not trying to look back all the way to Laravel 5.2. You've probably upgraded Sentry since then. But 6 and 7, like, that's not so old. If you came in and you were running, 6 was an LTS version for a pretty long time, right? Like, it's not anymore, it's not supported anymore, but it was supported for a pretty long time. If you came in and you started running Shift against a Laravel 6 project, which is pretty common, and you ran all the way to Laravel 11, you would still have this snippet in your Laravel 11 project, even though, and you get the warning that we did here. Again, there's all the information in the comments that you need to correct this. As we saw in my own video, I had enough detail here to figure this out and slim it myself. I have no idea why GitHub and stuff is running so slow right now. But anyway, the point here is that I get this comment, and then I also see that, oh, hey, Sentry updated, so go check the docs, which I did in the video, right? How hard would it be to look at the app handler, right? App exception handler, and say, oh, okay, if we find this snippet in your report method, and we strip it out, and if we strip it out and then you match a default file, a default handler, go ahead and remove it, tag something to re-add Sentry, and go ahead and upgrade it, right? Like, why not, right? I think that's pretty easy. It goes here. It adds an import. I think we could at least skeleton this out. Like, why not, right? There's probably enough people using Sentry. I don't know. Let me know in the comments, the viewers. Are you using Sentry? Who uses Sentry? Like, maybe, I know there's a bunch of other things. I know Spassy has something, but I think enough people are probably using Sentry that this would be a nice little touch, right? Let's go look. I think I have a handler in here. Here's an exception handler. It's got its own task. Probably wouldn't be that hard to kind of mess with it. So let's see what this is currently doing and see if there's an opportunity to kind of easily drop this in place. Okay, so if the file doesn't exist, kick on out of this task. Nothing to do, nothing to see here, right? Otherwise, pull the file, parse it into an abstract syntax tree so we can analyze it. Okay, so if it's heavily customized, then we leave this rebind comment that we saw, right? So there's the rub. Here's our rebind comment right here. Shift was unable to do stuff. You need to re-register it, blah, blah, blah. There's our rebind comment. Otherwise, so the kick here, I think, is in, there's a lot of code here. This all happened in heavily customized. So let's take a look at what heavily customized is. If you have other methods than register, render, or report, then it's heavily customized. That's fair. If you have other properties than levels, don't report, or don't flash, then you're heavily customized. That's pretty fair. Okay, here we go. If you have a method render and it's not the default body, so we're already doing some checking to see if it's default, right? And then you have report and if it's not the default body. So here's perfectly where we could drop it in. We could, is project using Sentry? Question mark. We could check Composer. We could check Composer to see if they're using Sentry. We could just flat out look for that particular snippet. It doesn't matter. And then extract old report code. So that's basically this. Where were we? The old file. Yeah, there we go. We were here. Is there any kind of link to here? We'll just copy it. Or well, we'll just copy it. Boop. Let's just copy that in, paste, comment that out. Okay, so if we extracted that and then we ran this, it's possible that we would end up returning false here, right? Yeah. What does default method body do? It just does the same thing. Yeah, it just does the same thing. It trims the segment to make sure that that's what it looks like. So if we were to pull that out, yeah, if we were to pull this part out, we would have the same method body. We would just have something that called parent, the method name with the argument. Boom, right there. So all we have to do is pre-trim that before we pass it in. So yeah. I think if we did that, well, there's a little bit more to do. Then you would have to say if you're using Sentry and we were able to extract it, you know, I'd want to re-add it to the handler. Am I doing register customizations? Yeah, see, I'm doing that already. I'm re-registering stuff in Bootstrap. Right? Yeah, see, here you go. I'm getting down in Bootstrap and I'm re-adding stuff and I'm even adding imports. So really all we would need to do, let's kind of map this out a bit more. So in heavily customized, if using project Sentry, extract old code, mark to re-add Sentry, okay? So we'd mark to re-add Sentry, and then when we got in here, register customizations, we would basically just down here say, we would say here, I think, if Sentry, then we would effectively go back to, I don't think I'll write the code, but let's finish the pseudocode. We'd effectively add this import. So we would say customizations, imports equals that. We would add that import, that way it gets imported down here. And then we would also want to append to snippet dot equal that, right? So yeah, it's pretty much that. I mean, we would add some line breaks and all that fun stuff, but that's really all we need to do, right? That's all I say it's all we need to do, but it's because all this other code already exists. But again, I think that's kind of the point here, right? That's the whole point of the stream and the whole point of Shift. If we can if we can incrementally improve this, I mean, it's 40 minutes. I've spent 40 minutes. Most of it's talking, most of it's, demonstrating how the stuff works. But in less than a half hour, I've removed 3 comments that were on the Laravel 11 PR and improved the automation just that much more. Like, how nice is that? If you are indeed using Sentry, like, how nice is that to see that automatically got bumped for you, right? That automatically got moved over to the new modern Sentry way. It's just that much more, right? I think that's pretty cool. So I think it's worth it, even if you're not using Sentry. It also opens the door if people are using other things like what's still out there is like Honey Badger still out there, or even if you're using Spassy's bug tracker, or hey, maybe Laravel has their own bug tracker here coming up. They're building Nightwatch and Cloud and all these other things. Like, it's not too far-fetched that they might have an internal bug tracker somewhere. So this paves the way to simply add code, gives me little hooks to add code for that too. So if someone comes along and says, oh, Shift did everything, wow, it automated everything. The only thing I had to change was, make sure, Honey Badger, was updated. Okay, cool. Now I did that. Now that person has 100% automation. Like, that's pretty cool. That's not always my goal, but that's pretty cool, right? So, all right, looks like my do not disturb is off. So that's that means, like, I think we're done with the stream now. Let's just put it back on just in case. Do not disturb. All right, cool. So let's see what we have here. Let's run vendor bin pint. Let's make sure everything's all cleaned up. We'll take a look at the changes we made, because again, I don't think it's a whole lot. We'll go ahead and get this commit prepped, and then I think I'll finish this little pseudocode bit up off stream. Again, it's the same stuff, right? We're just gonna go in, we're gonna do a little string to string comparison to see if this, again, if that's been modified in any kind of way beyond what you copy and pasted from an old version of their documentation. I don't want to change it. I want to leave the comment that's in there, right? You need to go look at that as a human. You might have added some context or done some special stuff here. Don't want to do all that, right? It's not one-to-one anymore. It needs a human to look at that. It needs a developer to look at that and see what the difference is and make sure that you upgrade correctly. All right. Oh, wow. I forgot this has so many files that it... There we go. Cool. Okay, so just a little tiny one on the exception handler while we were pseudocoding. So let's do a git add -p. Let's see what we've got going on here. Okay, so we just added a return type. We added this default policy method. We updated the default listener to now look for 2 things, the post 5.6 version and then pre 5.7 default values. We also added a default policies snippet to check to see if you just have the simple app model policy, which never would have existed, right? And then we have our pseudocode that I need to fill in the blanks on. We've made a little tiny refactor here to just kind of improve that error message, that internal assertion that we have, to make it a little more helpful of saying how many comments were actually left instead of just array not empty. Like, let's be better. So we did. Move that to the top, added a test case, move that to the top. That's it. So very minimal changes here. Four files, probably less than 100 lines of code in total. Most of that is the test, which proves it all works, and I can sleep at night that I'm not going to break something here in a couple weeks when I go and add more automation. So yeah, looks pretty good. And again, makes the PR 3 comments less noisy, so to speak. So all 3 of these comments in a row too, look at that, they were in a row. So that experience is so much better, right? I'm not reading through 3 comments in a row now that were potentially didn't need to be left, right? This didn't need to be left. It was all fine. I didn't have any policies or listeners or anything anyway, or events. And now I just bumped Sentry for you. So I could even leave a comment that says do that, or I could even do that, separately. So that's going to get left here when it, we don't have a commit here, but if we go look, I'm pretty sure, let's make sure of that. If we go look at the exception handler, what I would have seen is re-register exception handling. I would have had a commit, an atomic commit in the commits that would have demonstrated right in here, re-register. I would have seen one for re-register exception handling. And in there, I would have seen that Sentry got pulled over and my event, my exception handler got deleted instead of me manually deleting and doing that change myself way down here when we were working on stuff. Where was it? Project cleanup, maybe? No, there it is, bump Sentry. So now when I'm done, Shift will do this commit right here. And that's kind of why I talked about this yesterday. That's kind of why I like leaving atomic commits when I dog food Shift, is because now I can kind of reproduce this diff myself in the code. And that's exactly what I'll do with that pseudocode. It will end up doing this exact commit, and now that will be left and automated by Shift for future users. So I'll post when all this is out and actually deployed, hopefully later today. But thanks everybody for joining live on my first Wednesday of 2025 live stream. I will see you all next week.